Link Gets Woke, it's episode 7 of Game Boy Works Color. Nintendo has taken a bit of heat over the past couple of years for its tendency to bring barely upgraded ports of Wii U games to Switch and release them at full price as new releases. But can you blame them? Hardly anyone owned a Wii U, and some of those games deserved a bigger audience. And anyway, a good game is a good game, regardless of its age. So it's entirely fitting that one of the very first Nintendo creations to receive a barely upgraded port for a new platform is one of Switch's biggest releases for 2019, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Originally debuting in 1993 as a monochrome Game Boy release, Link's Awakening stands up as one of the absolute greatest works on that platform. And now, here it is again, just a couple of months following on from the Game Boy Color's arrival. Link's Awakening Deluxe makes a few tweaks to the older game and adds a few new things, but for the most part this is simply the original Link's Awakening in color. You can even play this cart on the original Game Boy and it's almost unchanged from running through the gray cart. You can also play it on Super Game Boy for a partial color upgrade and new Super Game Boy borders, of course, which makes it marginally superior to the first release for that small Venn diagram of gamers who hadn't upgraded to color and somehow didn't buy Link's Awakening the first time around. But basically Nintendo decided that they more or less got this game right in their first attempt, so they didn't tinker too much with the innards of this remake. And Link's Awakening Deluxe is a masterpiece of a game. It's not perfect, but it's an amazing high watermark for Game Boy and Game Boy Color software. Nintendo had come a long way from the primitive simplicity of early Game Boy releases like Super Mario Land. Link's Awakening in color looks almost like a top-tier NES game, aside from the muted, almost Master System-like color palette that was the Game Boy Color's trademark, of course. The visuals pack tons of charm, they animate smoothly, and everything has a wonderfully solid feel that Game Boy software rarely achieved. Frankly, Link's Awakening blows away the original Zelda for NES and plays a lot more like A Link to the Past for Super NES. Most of the key tools and weapons from A Link to the Past appear here, including the hookshot and the Pegasus boots. Tools that debuted on NES benefit from the addition of Super NES upgrades, like the way bombs can be lifted and thrown, and the power bracelet can be enhanced with a second-tier version. This is no mere reprise of A Link to the Past, though. Link's Awakening immediately distinguishes itself from its predecessor as a new and unique work, yet it doesn't stray as far from what people liked about its predecessor as, say, Zelda 2 did. It's a near-perfect portable extension of a console hit, and Nintendo wisely chose not to muck around too much with the winning formula here. The action will feel immediately familiar to anyone who's spent any amount of time with a previous game, yet they'll still find surprises and tweaks around every corner as they play. Directed by longtime Shigeru Miyamoto collaborator Takashi Tezuka and co-written by Yoshiaki Koizumi and Kensuke Tanabe, Link's Awakening puts Link into a situation unlike any other in the series' history. The plucky version of Link who starred in A Link to the Past returns here, shipwrecked in a storm and washed upon the beach of a strange island. This immediately sets the story apart from its peers. Not only does Link's Awakening not take place in Hyrule, it doesn't involve Zelda or Ganon or the Triforce at all. Instead, it's a small, standalone story with no overt connections to the rest of the Zelda saga. You can't even wield the Master Sword. Instead, Link's quest here is simply to figure out how to leave Koholint Island, the surreal land in which he has become trapped. The people of Koholint are kind of strange, and it's really quite a lovely place, so there could be worse fates than to be trapped there. But as it turns out, Koholint and its inhabitants aren't precisely real. At the peak of the mountain rising from the island's center, a massive egg sits. Inside, a creature called the Windfish sleeps, and its dream manifests as the island world. This is probably the closest Zelda has ever ventured into mind-bending chthonic existential horror, which is almost but not quite obscured by the upbeat music and visuals and all the quirky dialogue. As Link advances on his quest to awaken the Windfish and end the dream, the creatures who have been given life by the deity slumber lash out verbally at the hero, all but cursing his quest to end their existence for his own sake. And the player, too, is forced to contend with the morality of the situation. The kind people of Koholint, including a gentle young woman named Marin, and her decidedly Mario-esque father, Tarin, exist only as a side effect of the dreaming Windfish. Or do they? This question hangs heavy over Link's quest here. Will completing his mission to awaken the Windfish bring an end to Koholint and everyone who lives there? And if so, is his quest to escape the island even right? Not that the game really gives you a choice in the matter, this is not exactly a deep morality test, and the only path forward is to complete all 8 dungeons, acquire the magical instruments that can wake the windfish with a song that's woven throughout the island, and manifests most clearly through Marin herself. Link's Awakening may not involve the Triforce, but it still observes a traditional Zelda structure. The instruments required to perform the Ballad of the Windfish have been hidden within 8 dungeons scattered across Koholint. Inside each dungeon, you'll find not only an instrument, but also a useful tool or weapon that's necessary to complete that dungeon's puzzles and traverse the island to reach the next labyrinth as well. Every dungeon also contains a boss and a mini-boss, along with a host of familiar monsters like Zulls, Stalfoses, and Wizrobes. In fact, it seems pretty likely that the Windfish's dream is shaped by Link's subconscious. Not only does his quest through Koholint observe a familiar structure filled with recurring creatures, but Marin is called out as looking conspicuously like Princess Zelda. From this, we can deduce that Link is a big fan of the Mario games. Link's Awakening was the first Game Boy project for Nintendo EAD. The bulk of first-party work on the platform had come from Nintendo R&D 1 to this point, and EAD really went for it. Not only is this a rich, immersive adventure, it also blurs the line between their franchises in a way that hasn't really happened since, outside of, say, Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart. Besides the very obvious similarities between Talon and Mario, you'll also encounter plenty of other seemingly out-of-place references here. Underground passages are patrolled by Goombas and Cheep Cheeps, while busts of Bowser double as grapple anchor points. In Mabe Village, a lady named Madame Meow Meow keeps a Chain Chomp as a pet. You can snag a Yoshi doll as a UFO and crane catcher prize. You even learn a song from Mamu, who is better known in the US as Super Mario Bros. 2 villain Wart. There's also a small side quest initiated by Richard, a character from the Japan-only For the Frog the Bell Tolls, the game that laid the basic groundwork for Link's Awakening. Even game designer Will Wright makes an appearance, sort of. You meet a letter-obsessed man named Mr. Wright, who is the spitting image of Nintendo's in-game avatar of Will Wright from the Super NES version of SimCity. A fascinating deep cut, no doubt about it. The winking cameos are fun, but they also feed the sense of unreality to strengthen the narrative premise here. Game Boy may have been a smaller, less capable platform than the Super NES, but you wouldn't really know it from Link's Awakening. Koholint Island is by far the most complex and intricate world that had been seen in a Zelda game to this point. The limitations of the system result in a return to the screen-by-screen divisions of the NES overworld, rather than the free-scrolling maps of A Link to the Past. To balance out these limitations, the map has been given twice as many screens as the original Hyrule, 256 screens versus 128. Not only that, but the entire island is built as a dense, puzzle-like maze, full of interlocking pathways and areas that require specific navigational tools to access. Link's Awakening happily introduces its own new tools into the standard Zelda mix, most notably the Rock's Feather. The Rock's Feather gives Link the ability to leap, a skill he possessed inherently in Zelda 2, sure, but that was a different kind of game. In this case, the feather works in the standard top-down Zelda sandbox and allows environmental puzzles to unfold in new ways. You can leap pits, or you can leap wide pits by taking a page from Mario and using the Pegasus boots to do a running lead-in to your jump. You can also evade enemies by hopping over them or perform a jumping aerial slash to hit airborne monsters. The Mario connection becomes especially explicit when you descend into underground passages. As if it weren't enough that those areas are patrolled by Goombas, they use a side-on viewpoint too. And you can use the Rock's Feather to squash the Goombas by jumping on them if you don't want to use your sword or bombs or hookshot to destroy them. In other words, Link's Awakening has fun with its own premise, and despite the melancholy storyline, it doesn't take itself too seriously. Indeed, early on in the adventure, you meet a guy who tells you that he's going to show up lost in the mountains later in the game. And sure enough, he appears stranded on Tall Tall Mountain to play a critical role in the trading quest chain. Nintendo has said they took a lot of inspiration for Link's Awakening from the TV series Twin Peaks, and it shows. But this game isn't weird for the sake of being weird. It all works in the service of creating a one-of-a-kind take on Zelda. This unique quality drills all the way down into the controls and mechanics with which Link navigates Koholint. In other Zelda games, Link's sword was a constant. Once he acquired a blade, it was permanently assigned to a specific button. Here, that's no longer the case. Instead, the sword works like any other tool. Not only can you assign it to either Game Boy face button, you can also unequip it altogether. In fact, if you acquire the incredibly powerful boomerang in a trade with a hidden Goraya by the seashore, you don't even need to fuss with a sword most of the time. And where Link always equipped a shield by default in previous games, here the shield is a tool as well, and it takes on a more active role. Not only does it block projectiles, you can also use it to push objects. Again, this isn't simply a superficial change for the heck of it. On Super NES, A Link to the Past benefited from that system's more expansive controller layout. Link's Awakening, however, has to revert back to an NES caliber interface with only 2 buttons available. The previous game had mapped the ability to run, or to dash with the Pegasus boots, to its own dedicated button, but that's impossible here. So in order to allow for interesting combinations of skills, like the dash jump, Link has to be able to unequip his sword. And if you're removing the permanence of that item, why not all the others too? The versatility of Link's tool set here can work against the game at times, when you're traversing the dense passages of Koholint Island and find yourself constantly swapping between 3 or 4 tools. But this seems a minor complaint compared to all the possibilities that all-encompassing gear swapping opens up. A more meaningful complaint might be the random power-ups that enemies sometimes drop when defeated. The Piece of Power and Guardian Acorn double your attack strength and defense, respectively, for a surprisingly long time. These are incredibly useful, but anytime you collect one, the game's wonderful background music is replaced by an irritating 5-second loop. A concept that works for the Starmen in Super Mario Bros., but not here. After all, Starmen only appear at set locations and last for a few seconds, where these show up all over the place and can last several minutes. Every time you collect one of these drops, you also have to page through a few screens of text, a bad habit this game suffers from throughout. Anytime you collide with an interactive object, including rocks that can be lifted with a power glove, or stones that can be shattered with a Pegasus boot dash, the action pauses to let you know, hey, Link can't handle this object right now. This is fine once, but it happens every single time, which has the remarkable side effect of making you want to avoid interactive objects in the world with the same vigor you use to evade pits and spikes. This is arguably the beginning of the Zelda series' unfortunate tendency to bombard with players with didactic text, something that it wouldn't manage to shake free of for a couple of decades. But if Link's Awakening introduced some bad habits to the franchise, it also introduced plenty of wonderful concepts that would become mainstays of the series. For example, it's the first appearance of a guide owl who flutters in to offer Link a quick bit of guidance after he completes each dungeon. The owl's commentary is brief enough that it never feels intrusive, and it deepens the mystery of the island while also offering pointers to your next dungeon destination. Of course, actually reaching the next dungeon is almost never as simple as simply wandering over to its location on the overworld map. While a couple of dungeons in A Link to the Past were hidden by mystical tokens or other gates, every dungeon here requires a key to access, and those keys are always tucked away behind some sort of side quest. You may need to guide Marin to help wake a hippo that's blocked a route, or battle through a large mansion to retrieve valuable golden leaves for Richard, or help a mermaid recover her her necklace. But the process of accessing a dungeon can often be as involved and time-consuming as actually completing the dungeon itself. These tasks often intersect with a Zelda tradition that begins here, a trading quest chain, also known as the Straw Millionaire chain. Many characters around Koholint need specific items that can only be acquired by trading with other NPCs. So this teaches you to pay attention to the dialogue and character habits you encounter along the way. The Straw Millionaire chain begins with the Yoshi doll you receive from a UFO catcher machine in Mabe Village, and 14 items later you end up with a magnifying glass tool that allows you to spot invisible characters and objects. Trading chains would become a fixture of future Zelda games, but this one is the only one that's mandatory. Several dungeon keys can only be acquired once you've made a swap with an NPC in need. The Straw Millionaire sequence isn't just about hiding quest objectives behind extra tasks. Its true strength comes from the way in which it encourages you to get to know the citizens of Koholint and explore everywhere. Koholint makes for a wonderful Zelda setting because of all the oddball creatures and humans who populate it. A Link to the Past went a long way toward giving distinct personalities to the generic NPCs who wandered through Zelda 2's towns, but each and every person you encounter here has their own quirks and stories. There's a crocodile who loves canned food. A shy old man named Ulrira stammers when you meet him face to face, but over the telephone he always seems to know where Link needs to head next in his adventure. There's a shopkeeper who will rename your save file Thief if you go roguelike and steal from him. You unwittingly help a goat named Christine catfish Mr. Right as she passes off a photo of Princess Peach as herself. And of course, Marin and Terran play critical roles throughout the quest. Unexpected things happen along the way too. At one point, Link becomes haunted by a ghost who wants to be put peacefully to rest before you can advance in the story. This is the first Zelda game to really dig into the idea that the world around the dungeons and the people who inhabit that world are as important as the dungeons themselves. Indeed, the final dungeon is practically trivial. Once you find the book that tells you the route to the end, it's a simple journey to take on the nightmares at the end of the quest, most of whom are drawn from memories of Link's previous adventure in Hyrule. Although the world outside the dungeons was hardly anything to shrug off in the earlier games, Link's Awakening is the moment at which the series creators seem to decide that the characters who dwell in these strange realms are ultimately more interesting than the combat puzzles where Triforce pieces or magical instruments or whatever dwell. This would become even more of a driving philosophy in Majora's Mask, and arguably reached its peak in Wind Waker, which had very few dungeons, a handful of enemy designs, and something like 100 unique non-player characters. Link's Awakening also contains a few optional quests, most notably the hunt for secret seashells. If you manage to find 20 of these hidden throughout the world, you can trade them at the Seashell Palace for a special sword. The Seashell Sword is the one attack or defense upgrade contained in the original version of Link's Awakening. Unlike in other Zelda games, you don't find a better blade in the course of the story. And since the first version of Link's Awakening shipped in grayscale, you also didn't acquire colored tunics to enhance Link's defense. Naturally, this ties to the most substantial change Link's Awakening Deluxe brings to the table over its predecessor. The Deluxe reissue makes the expected changes, of course, including the aforementioned Super Game Boy frame and color additions. But it also throws in a few other additions. There's a new shop hidden north of the mysterious woods in which you can stop by to have your photo taken. And afterwards, the photographer will show up unexpectedly at key moments to commemorate your journey by snapping shots for your photo album. There's a lot in the whimsical Link's Awakening that feels of a piece with Nintendo's quirky 16-bit RPG classic Earthbound, but this might be the most overt connection. However, Link's Awakening Deluxe takes it a step further. Not only can you save photos in a commemorative album in-game, you can save those photos for real-life posterity as well. Link's Awakening Deluxe is the first game we've seen with support for Nintendo's Game Boy printer, a battery-operated thermal printer that shipped alongside the Game Boy camera peripheral shortly before the Game Boy Color's debut. Only about 3 dozen titles ultimately supported the printer, but this one puts it perhaps to its best and most charming effect. You can print any photo from your virtual album to the Game Boy printer and end up with a full album of tiny, postage stamp-sized pixel illustrations. Though good luck these days on finding thermal paper of the proper size that actually works. Still, that's all just gravy. The real addition this deluxe remake brings to the table is the inclusion of an all-new optional dungeon, the Color Dungeon. Interestingly, you don't need to play Link's Awakening Deluxe on a Game Boy Color in order to play the new material. Unlike Wario Land 2, you don't need to wipe your save file when you switch between platforms. You can walk right into the Color Dungeon on either system. But if you're playing on a monochrome system, you'll have to brute force your way through this new material, since it's based around color puzzles that don't read in grayscale. You enter the dungeon by answering a riddle about the color of 2 gatekeepers, and from that point on, it's all about color-based puzzles. Honestly, the Color Dungeon isn't all that great. It's brief, and the puzzles are fairly brain-dead compared to what you encounter in most of the later story dungeons. The bosses also aren't great, with the primary dungeon boss in particular demanding rapid-fire button mashing and constantly interrupting the flow of the fight with one of the most annoying examples of this game's insistence on bombarding players with tedious dialogue boxes. Still, it's worth tackling because your reward at the end is a choice of alternate tunics for Link, red or blue. Unlike the ring-based tunics in The Legend of Zelda, the tunics here aren't progressive defensive augments. Instead, you can only choose one or the other. The red tunic doubles Link's attack strength, while the blue doubles his defense. It's basically the same as having a permanent piece of power or guardian acorn equipped, except without the annoying music. And if you do pick up one of those temporary power-ups, they stack with the tunic you've selected. Honestly, the tunics are a little bit game-breaking since Link's Awakening was balanced to be completed without them. By the time you've collected most of the heart containers and coated yourself with Crazy Tracy's life-restoring salve, the blue tunic in particular makes you pretty much unbeatable. But it's a great bonus for less experienced players and a fun extra for returning fans. Plus, it's wholly optional, so it's just there for fun. Link's Awakening may not have been a perfect game, but it was an amazing expression of the Zelda concept in handheld form. Arguably better than any other that would appear in the years to follow, unless you maybe want to count Breath of the Wild as a handheld game. Which, I don't know. The limitations of the handheld format only rarely make themselves felt here. The dungeons suffer somewhat because they're almost all contained on a single floor instead of incorporating the multi-tiered designs of A Link to the Past. This limits the nature of the puzzles inside and results in labyrinths that tend to sprawl and become annoying to navigate. But by and large, the fundamental technical downgrades required by the move from Super NES to Game Boy, or in this case to Game Boy Color, don't really have a negative impact on the adventure. Almost everything has been neatly accounted for and even deflected to become an advantage, as with the way the loss of multiple face buttons resulted in a comprehensive tool swapping system. Link's Awakening is Nintendo at its creative best, and there's a reason the deluxe version essentially just regurgitates the original game with nicer colors. The original game didn't need much fixing. And now, more than 2 decades after Link's Awakening Deluxe, the Switch remake mostly consists of a facelift with some extra options. Sometimes a great game is simply a great game. And whichever is the version through which you choose to experience Link's Awakening, it's a masterpiece all the same. A Game Boy great made into a Game Boy Color great, and one assumes a Switch great too. Next time on Game Boy Works Color, we all feel terrible for the awful responsibility imposed upon the follow-up act.